Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is in theaters right now, and as we do often, we decided to recreate a shot from the trailer. This one, because it's awesome, so we did. Again, here's the original shot from the trailer, and then our recreation done using After Effects, Element 3D, Trapcode Mirror, and stock elements. So let's waste no time and jump right in, first with filming our actor. We shot Emily on the green screen with simple silhouette lighting, and then moved on to After Effects. Inside of After Effects, we'll create a new 4K comp and then a solid layer to apply Element 3D, which we'll use for the rocky landscape. Inside of Element, we'll add the main ground first by using the ground Rock 5 model we got from Turbo Squid, scale it up and really flatten it on the Y-axis to get a smoother, leveled ground for our character to stand on. And to get closer to the look that we want, we will change the material contrast, brightness, saturation, and use the diffuse color to warm it up a bit. For all the other rock formations, we spent some time using a variety of models to kit bash and build out the rest of our landscape, changing position, rotation, and scale of duplicated models, as well as including larger scaled up assets in the far distance for depth. All the models we use will be linked in the notes below as well, so if you want them, down there. If you're using a number of different assets and are going for a uniformed look, try to balance and match the colors closely, and you can speed up this process by copy and pasting the color number value and going through the scene materials. Or you could take one rock material and apply it to everything in the scene. But once our landscape is built, we'll change the environment map to something darker and exit element. Now we'll create a camera and go for a wide lens to match the original shot. We went with this 15mm to really fit a lot in frame. We'll change position and rotation of the camera, and once we like the framing, we'll create a null layer and make it 3D. Now link the camera to the null, which we can now use to animate the camera move. We like the rotating camera in the original, so we're going to set a keyframe for the null's Y rotation, then move to the end of the timeline and change the value to give us a constant rotation. Now with the shot framed up, we're going to add these distant floating rocks. So back inside of Element, we'll create a group 2, and again, add a bunch of the random rock models that we have, majority of them being the tall vertical ones. We'll also add a few of these pre-fractured models and small rocks which come included with Element, and apply a rock material to each. Back in After Effects, we're going to follow basically the same process as we did for the floating rocks in our Sandman recreation by going into Group 2 dropdown, Particle Replicator, and Set to 3D Grid. We'll change the position to push it into the distance and increase shape scale. All of these steps are completely customizable and unique to your scene and the models that you use, so we're just going through and changing random settings for scale and rotation before going into particle look and enabling multi-object. We altered a bunch of these values to spread the individual elements and fill the sky, and there was a lot of going back and forth and changing the random seed until we eventually got this. In the original, there's some vertical motion, so we can keyframe the Y scatter multi over time to shift elements up and down, as well as Y displace to add some extra movement, giving us this. There's a couple of bigger floating rock structures with the same slow destruction, which we can kind of mimic by duplicating the element group 2 and switching to group 3, then going through the particle replicator again and spending a while to alter a bunch of settings in keyframe to create this fake reverse destruction style animation. Just changing a couple of settings can give you different looks, so it's interesting to test out different things. To add another one to the right, we can copy the group utility and paste it in group 4, then inside Element, duplicate again, changing to group 4, and this time we'll hide most of the models to alter the look. Now change the replicator position, and once again going through the settings and set keyframes for some to add animation, giving us this. For the background, we'll be combining free stock images from Pexels and Unsplash, but before we do that, let's thank today's partner and the source of all the music you've been hearing, which is MusicBed. They have everything from big heroic scores to the music that we were using in the background of the tutorial, and in fact, there are 2 great playlists on their site filled with big blockbuster style scores, which you can find in the notes below. But MusicBed does have a lot of pretty much everything. They're easily one of my favorite places to find music for projects because their quality is through the roof thanks to the amazingly talented and passionate artists that MusicBed works with. They also also have over 40,000 songs and a curated roster of over 1,000 authentic and relevant artists like Ryan Talbert, who you are listening to right now, all available to license for any project. And they make finding the right music super easy with their browse and search tools built with filmmakers and creatives in mind. Use anything from genre and mood to advanced filters like BPM and key. And if you still need help finding whatever you need, their team can help with complimentary song searches. And if you use the code FilmRiot at checkout, you'll receive 1 month free when you purchase an annual subscription. So check out the playlist below and take your projects and films to the next level with MusicBed.
Logo.
Again, we are using free stock images from Pexels and Unsplash for the background, so we're going to create a new comp and make it wider to account for the camera move. First, we'll use one image as the main background and then build up with other stock using the pen tool to mask out sections that we like. For this area around one of the portals, we can use the mesh warp effect to distort it more spherically. For better blending of other elements, you can set them to screen and use curves to crush the shadows. We spent some time adding multiple elements, masking and warping them to closely match the original, and now we'll add an adjustment layer and use a tint effect to desaturate and curves to lower the brightness. Using a duplicate, we'll mask the bottom area and lift the shadows to create some distant haze. Then using multiple other adjustment layers, we'll mask to different areas and add high feather and use curves to tint them different colors. The original shot has some of these warm energy fractals, which we can get by masking sections of these ocean images, setting to screen, crushing the shadows, tinting and coloring a warm shade. We also duplicated the haze layer, making new feathered masks over the fractals and warming up the curves effect. To add some subtle animation like the original, we'll make a new adjustment layer and use the liquefy effect on the last frame of the timeline, just warping different areas, then setting a keyframe for the percentage going back to frame 1 and turning the percentage down to 0. We'll also use a displacement effect with 0 vertical displacement, but a bit of horizontal keyframe to change over time. For some pinch and chromatic aberration, we added Red Giant's chromatic displacement with a low amount. But back in the main comp, we'll drop the background comp below everything, make it a 3D layer, and reposition it with it pushed far in the distance and scaled up large enough to fill the background for the full camera animation. We also want some fog for depth in the landscape, but using the built-in element fog effect doesn't work in this instance because of the various colors and contrast in our background. For example, if we sample a color here, the fog works well, but not up here unless we sample again, and so on. So what we can do instead is duplicate both the background and element and move above. On the new element layer, under output, select world position and change these settings to get a distance and feather suitable for the fog in your scene. Invert the matte and set the background layer below to Luma matte, making it visible in the brightest areas of our element scene. Now, if we use a fast box blur on the background and use a curves to add contrast, we can get a hazy fog look. You can also use another curves before the blur too and lower layer opacity. If we darken the main element layer, you can more easily see the effect this fog has. Next, for the lighting, the original terrain looks like it is mainly lit by the warm reactive light from these strands, so we'll create a new light and make it a warm color. Because our background is a 3D layer, we need to switch accept lights and shadows to off on both this and our fog background layer, and we'll move the light over to one of the strand positions. If you want to direct it in a specific area, you can change it to a spotlight and use rotation as well as the cone angle and feather to focus it. Spotlights can also make shadows, just enable them inside of the element render settings too. Now we'll duplicate the light and move it over to where the other strand will be, and did this several more times to light different areas of our scene closely following the original, including these purple highlights angled at the floating rock destruction areas. Then using a curves effect on the element layer, we'll add some contrast and boost the red slightly. Again, for our character, we shot Emily on a green screen with the camera locked off at a low height close to the ground to match, and we used warm color balanced lights on either side of her to act as light reaction from the strands. So we'll drop her into the comp, mask around her and feather slightly, and while shooting we asked her to keep her feet locked, meaning we don't have to keyframe the mask. We'll use key light to key it, move the anchor point to her feet and make her a 3D layer, setting the accept lights and shadows to off again and change position, rotation, and scale, lining her up in the frame until it looks like she's standing on the CG ground. Then using curves, we adjust contrast and color to match our scene. With a new adjustment layer above, we'll use Red Giant's optical glow and alter the settings to give a soft glow to the full frame. For the sky portal, we'll use a duplicate and change settings again to focus on the portal specifically, as well as using a color tint. Then using another copy of the glow with the new settings, including radiate, to add some subtle volumetric style beams. For the energy strands, we'll create a new comp, this time making it shorter, then create a new solid and apply mirror, which is part of Red Giant's Trapcode suite. Mirror uses 3D fractal geometry, which we can use to get a similar look to the original by increasing the size X, lowering size Y, pushing away in Z space, increasing vertices, and bending the X axis. In the fractal settings, we'll change the multi, lower amplitude and frequency, increase complexity and smooth normals, then set a keyframe for the evolution and scroll X. Now move to the end of the timeline and increase both values for some smooth animation. And in the shader dropdown, we'll change these two settings. Next, use a turbulent displace. To add some more shape, changing complexity, amount, and size, then keyframing offset and evolution to animate throughout the shot. We'll also use a liquefy effect to add some bloated and shrunken areas. With that done, we made a few variations, altering multiple settings to differentiate them, as well as make some thinner for the most distant strands. We'll render these out and can drop them into the main comp, setting to screen and making them 3D layers, again switching off accept lights and shadows. After finding the placement for each one, we want to move most beneath the element layer, but when we do this, the glow adjustment layers affect the strands, which we don't want. So instead, what we can do is duplicate the camera and null, move above the strand layers, and pre-compose with all the strands we want to be in the background. To fill these gaps, use a solid composite and set to black. Next, we'll use a set matte effect, select the element layer, choose effects and mask, and invert matte. Then set the blending mode to screen. We'll also need to use a set matte for Emily, but it doesn't work with 3D layers. Rather, it uses the alpha for how she would be as a 2D layer, so we need to pre-compose her with a duplicate camera and null 2 for it to work. Now we can add color and glow effects. Another benefit of doing it this way rather than actually placing the strands below is we get this glow spilling in front of the obscuring layers, which we wouldn't get otherwise. For this close strand, we will again pre-comp with duplicate camera and null and copy paste the other strand effects onto it. However, we want this strand in front of most of the element, but to be obscured by these foreground rocks, so we'll duplicate element, and on this version, go to the camera cutoff settings and change the far plane to bring it forward until we are left with just the area we want obscured. Now change the strand set matte effect to this new element layer and we get this. We'll just use an extra glow since this one is closer and we are basically done. Although one thing we ended up not liking so much was the look of the fractal on some of the strands, so we changed the fractal individual frequencies and also used a duplicate on top set to screen and altered some of the settings to get a slight variation, giving the strands a bit more detailed than re-rendered. You can right click and reload to update if it doesn't automatically. The last steps were adding a bit of shadow for Emily using a dark curves on a mask adjustment layer, adding some particles using the full frame Embers 3 and 4 from our Embers pack set to screen, some lens stock, a chromatic aberration, and ended with a grade. And you can try out different element group settings or camera animation to change the look and get something more unique, but that is it. Our breakdown done all in After Effects. As always, if you try it for yourself, shoot it over to us on any of the social places, links below. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.